Welcome to Pennsylvania Newsmakers, and as always, thanks for watching. Well, what about data breaches and identity theft? Is that affecting you? But first, how about this? Should the death penalty be legal in the state of Pennsylvania? As they say, let's get to it.
This is Pennsylvania Newsmakers, a fast-paced, unrehearsed weekly discussion with and about the leaders who shape your world. And now, here's your host, Terry Madonna.
Well, we have quite a program today involving a whole series of important subjects. Let's start with the death penalty. Joining me to talk about whether the death penalty should be legal or not is the Honorable John T. Adams. He's the District Attorney of Berks County. He's also the past president of the Pennsylvania District Attorneys Association. Mr. Adams, you have a lot of titles here going on, don't you?
I do. But, you know, most importantly, as the district attorney, it puts me in the middle of the fray.
Sure. Well, look, I don't think there's any doubt that there's a big debate going on, not just in Pennsylvania, but around the country about the death penalty. 21 states have abolished the death penalty. When Governor Wolf took office as governor of the Commonwealth, he put a moratorium on the death penalty, and overall throughout the country, death penalty executions have dropped sharply over the last couple of decades. So here's the situation, and you're going to explain it to our viewers. There's a case right now before the Pennsylvania State Supreme Court testing the constitutional validity of the state's death penalty. Do I got that right?
That is correct. That argument was held on Wednesday of this past week.
Okay. Well, let's talk about what's at issue here.
Well, at issue is that there have been challenges that the Pennsylvania Supreme Court accepted, challenging the constitutionality of the Pennsylvania death penalty statute. Those who are against it believe that there is racial disparity involved in the death penalty and how the death penalty is administered in Pennsylvania. Those of us who support the death penalty rely on a recent study by John Kramer from the Penn State University that indicated there were no racial disparities in the death penalty. So it's a matter of studies. But the Supreme Court took this very important issue up on what is called a King's Bench petition. And it's a petition for extraordinary relief. And we are all sitting and waiting to see if the Supreme Court will overturn many years of precedent that found the death penalty constitutional.
Well, there's still majority support in the polls that I've looked at for the death penalty, but it certainly has dropped. It tends to go up and down a bit, but it certainly has the support for it has dropped. I guess the fundamental question here is, if the court says it's unconstitutional and we have people on, quote, death row, end quote, what happens to them? Well,
their sentences would merely be commuted to be life sentences.
Life imprisonment,
So they would be subject to a term of imprisonment of life. And frankly, it would involve them moving back into general population from death row. It's pretty simple.
Is this the first? I mean, the death penalty in my history has always been controversial. There are people who oppose it on moral grounds, on religious grounds, and you can certainly understand. Go ahead.
Absolutely,
you can finish my thought.
It's a very controversial subject, and it's controversial for those of us who are decision makers as to whether or not we should seek it. I've been the district attorney for 12 years, and I've only sought it 4 times. And the last time I sought it, I withdrew the death penalty after the verdict. It's a tough decision that we wrestle with each and every day in our jobs. And we don't want to seek it. We save it for the worst of the worst. And frankly, if you look around the state, we've become very conservative in seeking the death penalty. District attorneys throughout the state rarely seek it.
So is that one of the reasons why the number of people who've been convicted has dropped, because you're not seeking it as much?
Exactly. We are definitely not seeking it as much. As a matter of fact, over the past decade, there's only been 6 to 7 death penalty trials in the state of Pennsylvania each and every year. So I think that many years ago, especially in Philadelphia, they sought it all the time. But that trend has completely changed.
Yeah. So if you had to make a wild guess, what do you think the Supreme? I shouldn't do this to you, put you on the spot, but you've been there before.
I have, and
what's the Supreme Court likely to do?
We're not certain, but I think if we were betting people, we would bet that they would maintain the constitutionality of the death penalty and defer this decision to the legislature.
I knew you were going to say that because some have insisted. I think that's the position of the Attorney General of the state. Do I have that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. Yes.
Josh Shapiro, the Attorney General, who's been on this program. Go ahead.
Yeah, and that is our position. If in fact the electorate wants to change, then the legislature needs to speak.
Talking about long tenure, long time service, I put it this way, in our prisons, should sentences be commuted? We're going to get to that with the district attorney after these words.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by the Pennsylvania Chamber of Business and Industry, the statewide voice of business, and by the Pennsylvania State Education Association and Partners for Public Education, bringing the power of a great education to our schools, our students, and our communities. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Pennsylvania Highway Information Association, the go-to source to learn about transportation projects and issues. Please visit pahighwayinfo.org. And by the Pennsylvania Manufacturers Association. Business in Pennsylvania is our business.
Welcome back. I'm chatting with John T. Adams. He's the Berks County District Attorney. He's also the past president of the Pennsylvania District Attorneys Association. All right, we were just talking about what happens if you don't get the death penalty, but you get a life sentence, and there are other people who, for a variety of criminal violations and perhaps civil, get long-term sentences, and now there's a push to commute people with long-term sentences. What's that about?
Well, generally those are cases where they were convicted of first or second degree murder and they received a life sentence. And we're seeing a push now. The law has not changed. They were always eligible to have their sentences commuted. But frankly, the Board of Probation and Board of Pardons was kind of dysfunctional for many years based on some historic problems that took place when they did commute some sentences.
Tell the folks what that board is.
The
Lieutenant
board,
Governor chairs it. Go ahead.
The Lieutenant Governor chairs it. There's a group of individuals that serve on that board. Victims, advocates are represented. The Attorney General's on that board, so there's some law enforcement on that board. It's a diverse board.
Right, and they make recommendations to the Governor of the Commonwealth for
sentences to be commuted. Yes.
Yeah, good point. Go ahead.
Yeah, and frankly, we are seeing now a lot more individuals applying to have their sentences commuted who are serving life sentences. And as a district attorney, we want to make a thorough consideration of that. We are not going to rubber stamp this to say no way, because there are some people who have shown changes in behavior and they've been in jail for a long, long time, and it is, they're going to probably be nearing the end of their life, so it might be to dignify themselves to allow them to be released. But we're going to look closely at these cases to make certain that they are not a threat to our communities. And we're also looking for the victims to give us their input as to whether or not someone's sentence should be commuted.
If the victims are still alive.
Exactly. Oh, that's right.
Some of these people have been in a couple of decades, right?
Yes, and sometimes it takes us a lot of time to locate families of the actual victim of the crime.
So would this take a state policy? You said it already can be done. Is this just a question for the Probation and Parole Board? are they going to have to resolve this, or you need help from the state legislature?
Well, no, the process is there.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
And the process has been there. However, we're seeing it becoming very popular. As a matter of fact, 21 individuals had a hearing yesterday where the board will consider 21 commutations of life sentences.
Okay.
And, there are some that I'm sure that victims will advocate against it, but there may be a number of cases where not only victims will advocate and support it, but also, from my perspective, we would support it.
We have about a minute left. Trends in probation and parole.
We're seeing that we want to make some differences. We want to not over-supervise individuals who are on probation and parole, and we've instituted some changes, especially in my county, where we will consider early termination of probation when they've paid off their fines and costs and restitution, and they've behaved. They have not been violated. And again, let's use our resources smartly.
Right.
Let's not over-supervise certain individuals.
Well, look, thanks for the update. This has been very, very helpful. And now we're going to talking about another subject of importance, data breaches, identity theft. Boy, every day there's news about that. We're going to provide you with an important update, and we'll do that after this break.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Pennsylvania Credit Union Association. Pennsylvania Credit Unions, where people are worth more than money. To find a credit union that is right for you, check out ibelong.org. And by the Energy Association of Pennsylvania, Pennsylvania's energy information source. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Association of Pennsylvania State College and University Faculties, representing the faculty and coaches who are devoted to providing quality public higher education for Pennsylvania's college students.
Well, identity theft is on the rise, as well as data breaches. How about this? Almost 50% more of our data was stolen. I think I got that correct. Joining me to talk about it is Patrick Conway. He's the president and CEO of the Pennsylvania Credit Union Association. And George Rudolph, he's the CEO of the Pennsylvania State Employees Credit Union. You got that?
PSECU.
I know, but we have to spell it out to begin. All right, I'm telling you, the list of data breaches that you all supplied me is, I knew it was going on. I had no idea that we're talking about 4 billion records. So with our viewers out there, almost everybody has had their data stolen at one point or another.
Yeah, Terry, it is shocking, isn't it? Just this year alone, there have been more than 2,000 breaches. And as you said, those 2,000 breaches have compromised more than 4 billion records. And, stop and think about that for a second. There's 7.5 billion people on Earth, right? So that's a pretty scary statistic. Yeah, and we
and you have a list, a huge list of the data that's been breached. I mean, Poshmark, Capital One, Quest Diagnostics, Checker Restaurants. Well, we know about Facebook. That's been, and Dunkin' Donut. Go ahead.
And even last week there were a couple of new ones. Russell Stover's was one that was announced last week as well. So it's a really tough environment, and the rate at which it's increasing is alarming. In some cases, it's almost doubling year over year. But before we get too far into this, though, it might make sense to explain to your viewers what a data breach is. And so it really is the loss of any sensitive information, whether that be credit card numbers, debit card numbers,
I know
or in some cases Social Security.
I was going to say, you're heading to Social Security.
Yeah, I mean, the crown jewels, right? Social Security, driver's licenses, and all those types of things. And when you put some of those pieces together, they become pretty potent. So But there's a lot of things, and I'll get to those later, that consumers can do to protect themselves despite this really difficult situation.
It can happen anywhere, in any industry, and guess what? Healthcare led the way, right?
Healthcare did lead the way. Retail, there's been a lot of breach activity in the retail industry, particularly food service, hospitality, stores. Target, a couple years ago was one of the biggest early on. So it can happen in any industry. In this day and age, it's just, it's rampant and it's a problem. So people really need to tune in to try to protect.
What do they do with the information once they get it? I'll ask both of you. You go first. What do they do with it when they get your data?
Well, they sell it, and they can use that information. Identity theft is a big problem.
Yeah, I want to get to that in the next segment. Yeah,
absolutely.
Go ahead. So at any rate,
let me, if I can. So it's important to also understand that the place in which the data is taken or compromised isn't always where it's being used. And so the reason why you see, for example, healthcare and retailers being the places where it's taken is because oftentimes they have that sensitive information. But that sensitive information is generally used then in other places where there's opportunities. And unfortunately, a lot of times that's in financial crime.
Yeah, and I guess credit and debit card information is the most breached, as I understand it. Correct?
Yes, it is. And it's still a convenient way to shop.
So if they get your credit card, what do? Do they then use it to buy things until you catch up with them? Somebody catches, you get the bill for something you didn't buy, right?
Right. And our credit unions and banks, the financial institutions issuing the cards typically are very good about catching that and letting you know and getting it shut off. And they take care of the responsibility. The consumer really has no risk.
And while you're on it, it looks like that it can't be, maybe you can slow it down, but it doesn't look like there's much that's being done, right?
Well,
to stop it?
It's the world that we live in, unfortunately. But there are things consumers can do. Check your credit report annually.
Yeah,
keep a close eye on your accounts. And really be aware of activity. In that part of your life. And some of us get busy and sort of forget about that.
Yeah, all right, we're going to run to a break. Here's another aspect of it. It's called identity theft. Has your identity been stolen? We'll find out about what can be done to prevent it, if anything.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Pennsylvania Medical Society. Inspired physicians committed to the good health of Pennsylvanians and the advancement of the practice of medicine. And by the Pennsylvania Healthcare Association, the future of long-term care.
Well, let's shift our attention to something else that's very important, is identity theft. It happens frequently. It's on the rise. All right, Patrick, I'm going to start with you. What is identity theft?
Sure, Terry. It's a growing problem and has been for years. It's been accelerating. It's when the fraudsters get a hold of your sensitive information. For example, your Social Security number, your credit card information, your home address, all of that personal data, and then they can literally steal your identity, and it takes consumers, in many cases, years to restore that. It's a real problem, and it's on the rise.
And can it create serious credit problems for you?
Oh, absolutely.
What if people, they steal your identity, they go out and go in and buy clothing, and who knows, probably not houses and cars, but they can buy a lot of stuff.
Absolutely, sure.
And in some cases, they actually open up credit on your behalf, unfortunately. So it is really, really important to protect that.
Yeah.
And to keep
so how widespread is it?
Oh, it's incredibly widespread. I mean, each year we see it growing. Not sure if I have the statistics, but it's unfortunately it's a rampant problem, and it continues to accelerate. And the more fraudsters and activity we see, on the internet, it's crazy.
All right. Well, I think the fundamental question here is, how do you prevent it? What should the folks do to make sure that it doesn't happen to them? No, make sure may not be the correct way to put it.
Yeah, unfortunately. So I'd say first and foremost, watch the red flags. And what we mean by red flags are things that that you should be careful not to do. So if you're getting calls or you're getting emails asking you for sensitive information and you're not sure, whether or not that is the entity that's asking for that information, hang up and call the entity back from the phone number that you know, your bank or whoever that might be. Anyone that calls you, asks you for gift cards as payment, things like that, we should never do. Any requests that come with a sense of urgency, take your time, be patient, because these are the things that can get you in trouble. So obviously looking at your monthly account statements, checking your credit report on an annual basis to see if there are any new accounts opened up on your behalf that you weren't aware of or that you didn't actually open up. And then, last but not least, there are a lot of really great credit monitoring services out there that will actually alert you anytime new credit is opened on your behalf or any type of inquiry or transaction is done on your credit report. And so then you can proactively go in there, take a look at what has happened and address it early.
And if you're not careful, Patrick, that can destroy your credit. I mean,
Absolutely.
You can spend years trying to get your credit restored, correct?
That's right. Yeah, when your identity is stolen and people open new credit accounts under your name, it can destroy your credit and can take years to restore that.
That's why it's so important to hit it early.
One of the things, I mean, every day I get 10 robocalls on my home telephone. And they always say, click here, give me this kind of information. And they make it sound like they're legitimate. And my sense is the federal government and state governments need to intervene, and the telephone companies need to get active, because it's illegal, as you know. And is that an important way in which people give out their sensitive data? I mean, they volunteer it. It doesn't get stolen.
Absolutely.
They volunteer
it.
Absolutely.
Now, holding them accountable with the law is tricky, because a lot of times they're acting undercover, so finding them becomes challenging. But again, I go back to what you don't want to do is give them any information. If someone calls you and says they're with your credit card company or they're with your bank or with the IRS, if it doesn't feel right, it probably isn't right, and the best thing you can do is hang up and go look for the phone number yourself online and then give them a call.
And the credit unions have a variety of identity theft protections and restoration services, so people should be in touch with their local credit
union. That's right. Stay in touch with your financial institution. Credit unions are doing a lot to protect their members. Don't fall prey to those phishing expeditions. Don't click on things that don't feel right. As George said, if it doesn't seem right, it's probably not. And work with your financial institution as your trusted financial advisor to guard against this sort of identity theft and continued fraud.
And at PSCCU, we have a team that does nothing but monitors these types of situations on credit and debit cards, as well as other types of financial crimes. We work very closely with federal and local authorities, meet with them on a monthly basis to really try to stay ahead of this. But it's, again, really important that the consumer is also an active part of the solution.
All right, we're out of time, but I want to thank you. I mean, this is an important subject, and you'll come back and keep us posted on the changes that take place. All right, we'll see you next week for another edition of Pennsylvania Newsmakers, and as always, stay well.